As you know, like most of the day after plans did not really include Palestinian voices much in their, planning. But I think this plan brings a clear and obvious and strong Palestinian voice as it is made basically or proposed basically by Palestinian intellectuals or technical group. Here, when we talk about the transition, the reference is aligned with the frameworks advanced by the UN Development Program, the State of Palestine, local governments in Gaza, and of course in the West Bank, and the Palestinian private sector, taking into consideration the communique of the Extraordinary Arab Summit. There are certain principles for this plan. I think like one is that the parties commit to diplomacy first and to the international law and agree to be held to account for violation. As we know that Israel has never been made accountable for its crimes in Palestine, for its long-term occupation.
Well, hello and welcome. And here today we're to come together to discuss the publication, the launch, if you like, of a major new initiative, Palestinian Armistice Plan. It's it's described as charting a rights-based transition for a Palestinian-Israeli peace. It's been the long work of a group of Palestinians who have been putting a great deal of effort and thought into the construction of a free and independent Palestine. It's a plan of some detail, which is what many people might actually say is rather lacking in what is being offered now as a take it or leave it, a 21-point plan it's called, the Trump plan, but really having read the contributions from our guests today, having read their report, which is actually produced by the Cambridge Initiative on Peace Settlements, a highly respected group which has done a great deal of work also around Russia and Ukraine. At a time of deep unseriousness, actually, it's refreshing to know that there are people who are dedicated, who have been working behind the scenes for some time now to prepare and present a serious blueprint for the future of an independent Palestine. And at a time, as we can see, where the international institutions, the United Nations in particular, the work of the UN General Assembly, and much else, international law, and much else besides, has been circumvented by the Israeli state and also by its primary supporter, the United States. It's very important, I think, that we have this discussion today. So thank you for joining us out there. And thank you principally to our three guests who I'd like to introduce to you. And then we can perhaps talk a bit more about this armistice plan and the future for Palestine. These are dark days, very depressing in many respects. A genocide is underway. People may say, well, it's all very well having a luxury to talk about a blueprint, an armistice, a future plan. But there has to be a future for the Palestinian people, and one based on self-determination. Of that much, the world is agreed. Zaha Hassan is a human rights lawyer and a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Dr. Jamal Naseba is a former global fellow at the Wilson Center and co-author of the Palestinian Armistice Plan. Dr. Wissam Amer is a visiting professor and Counsel for At-Risk Academics Fellow at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom, as well as Dean of the Faculty of Communication and Languages at Gaza University in Palestine. Thank you so much for joining us today. People, I have to ask you this because your work has been, I know, been underway for quite some time. I'll start with you, Zaha, if I may. You came together under the auspices of the Cambridge Initiative on Peace Settlements. People will say, well, you know, the timing of this, when a Trump Netanyahu plan, which has been welcomed by a number of Arab states, of course, as we know, including the Palestine Authority, but essentially many observers do see this as a plan that really favors Israel more than the Palestinians and still leaves so much unanswered. But people will say, well, the reality, of course, is, at the moment, in the global stage, it's might is right. How can you break through with a serious alternative plans and blueprint for the future of Palestine when effectively the President of the United States, who seems to be calling all of the shots presently, is saying, take it or leave it. This is what is there. So how do you hope that this plan will cut through and get the serious discussion and analysis and also implementation that you want?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. You're right. It doesn't feel like the world is interested in rights or international law or, inclusive peacemaking at the moment. And that's part of the impetus for the Palestinian working group that came together, the technical working group that came together to prepare the Palestinian Armistice Plan. We had been, observing how many different parties, Israeli, American think tanks, putting forward day after scenarios and plans for Gaza and for Palestine that was devoid of Palestinians, devoid of Palestinian-led governance, really, marginalizing Palestinian national institutions and really marginalizing the notion of Palestinian self-determination in all of these plans. So we got together and we wanted to present a counter to all of that, but also prioritizing, an end to the genocide that's going on. I mean, because you can't really talk about a day after in the midst of what we've been seeing unfold in Gaza and in the ethnic cleansing that's been going on in the West Bank. So you're right that, we are whistling against the wind in a way, but we believe that our plan, which is actually based on UN principles, it's based on international law and international consensus. It has incorporated within it the Arab plan that was presented by the Arab League and endorsed by Europeans as well as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It also includes and is based on the Beijing Declaration, which is a agreement that was signed by all of the Palestinian political factions, including Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, Fatah. So it embodies a consensus, an international consensus, a Palestinian consensus, and it's built on the pillars of international law. So we think this is the only plan that can actually withstand, all the forces that are against Palestinian self-determination. And it can actually not only bring peace to the region, but it can be the beginnings of a peace between Palestinians and Israelis. And so we aren't naive in thinking that the United States is not going to be a supporter of this plan, but we do believe that this plan can be supported by Palestinians first and foremost, and by the region, and by the international community. And so what we hope to do by talking about this plan is to start to build momentum around it, because the alternative that's being presented by the Trump 20-point plan, which we can talk about, is anything but going to deliver peace for Israelis and Palestinians.
Thank you, Zaha. I mean, Jamal, I have to say, armistice is not an end to a conflict. I mean, it's part, presumably, of a process of getting to an end to the conflict. That's the title, a Palestinian Armistice Plan. And people may turn around and say, well, yeah, armistice. There's still, for instance, an armistice between the two Koreas, some 60 odd years since, or possibly even 70, I can't remember, since the Korean War in the 1950s. You presumably don't envisage this armistice being so long as that. and you have a plan that you have put together essentially for post-armistice, for final peace. But tell me, if you will, how this came about. Who decided this would be a good thing to do? How did you pull together everybody? Tell us something about those who have been involved, and ultimately, what you're hoping to achieve from this.
Sure. Thank you, Mark, and thanks for having me. Let me start, I think this, if I may, just by addressing the first part of the question before I talk about the who. And I would say first that this is actually a transitional plan. It is a practical and pragmatic plan which aims to get from where we are today, or where we were a few months ago at least when we put this out, to a point where we can enter into a permanent peace agreement with Israel. However, we have no preconceived notion of what that permanent peace with Israel looks like. We care about the basic rights that Zaha mentioned, and we base our structures on those rights: self-determination, freedom, equality, etc. But international law, obviously. But what we're trying to do is build a series of practical steps from genocide, ethnic cleansing, where we are today, until a point where it is possible for the Palestinians and the Israelis to actually sit together and envisage what their permanent peace will look like. And by the way, that also means that we don't necessarily preconceive or pre-decide on whether that permanent peace will be in the form of one state, two states, a confederation. We believe that is too early to decide now. But we believe also, equally, that we have to start from where we are today, and where we are today is a Palestinian state on the occupied territory of 1967, and that is the entity which needs to operate with Israel in order to move towards that peace and function within the transitional period, that armistice, if you like. And then the second point I'm going to make, which I think is extremely important, is that the genocide in Gaza, the killing in Gaza, the mass murder in Gaza, is not a killing, mass murder, genocide of Hamas, nor is it indeed a mass murder of Gazans, although they are principally Gazans. It's first and foremost a mass murder of human beings. So that's one. Two, those human beings are Palestinians, and those Palestinians happen to be the Palestinians who are in Gaza, some originally from Gaza, and some who are refugees in Gaza from other parts of what then became Israel. And what is happening in Gaza is part of a much longer process in which the Israelis and the Palestinians have not yet been able to make peace. So the two parties in this conflict, if you like, if it's a conflict, and it is an ongoing conflict, even if the genocide is something different within that, the two parties are the Palestinians on the one side and the Israelis on the other. They are not Hamas on the one side and the Israelis on the other. And therefore, another important element, I think a crucial element of our plan, is that it requires the Palestinians as a whole to enter into an agreement with the Israelis as a whole for an armistice that lasts for a transitional period. And the third thing is that it is abundantly clear that we are unable as Palestinians to protect ourselves, and the Israelis are constantly and continuously concerned about their security. And therefore, we do need, and we call for the presence of international forces to protect us under a United Nations mandate. And that those forces ought to be not only in Gaza, where we are seeing the brunt of the violence and killing, but also in the rest of occupied Palestine, meaning the rest of 1967, the West Bank. And that is also crucial because we believe that this is what you need to have in order to begin to move holistically towards a peace.
Jamal, if I might just come in there, I mean, as you know, in the run-up to the UN General Assembly, you have the Macron French-Saudi initiative. You had the resolutions that have been passed at both at UNGA, but also previous General Assembly resolutions and UN resolutions, all effectively saying very much the same. Essentially, the United States and Israel completely ignored much of all of this. We know also Prime Minister Netanyahu, as soon as he got back to Israel, actually said, "Well, I haven't really signed anything that gives self-determination to the Palestinians, a Palestinian state." So, in a way, there is so much more set out here that you have all put together than has been that I've seen from anywhere else. But yet the fundamentals are going to be ignored by the Americans and Netanyahu. So I suppose the question is this really a plan for a post-Trump, post-Netanyahu world? If it's got any chance of success?
If I'm going to answer that briefly, and then I'll let someone else jump in, but I would say we have seen more action by Trump than the previous administration on this matter. And I think that we have all had a lot of hope that he would be able to exercise his leverage over Netanyahu to get something to change in the region and to stop this insanity. However, I agree with you that that it looks to me a little bit like the plan that President Trump proposed to Netanyahu, that is now being that we've all seen, this 20-point or 21-point plan. It looks to me like it may end up being a little bit like the paper that Clement Attlee signed in Munich when he walked away. And I'm worried that President Trump is going to be, once again, as he has been in the past, unfortunately, misled by Netanyahu. Yeah. So my answer to you is, I think it is great that there is interest from the United States and that they appear to be willing to put their money where their mouth is. They want to move on this. President Trump wants to see an end to genocide. He said that. The plan doesn't include ethnic cleansing. That's great. There's a few positive things there. I think that President Trump also, I hope, wants it to work. And if he wants it to work, then he's going to end up having to modify it, in my view, and I believe also in my colleagues' view, towards what we have proposed. Because without the additional elements that we've proposed, I don't think this will work.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting you say that because, of course, and coming to you, Sam, I mean, we have seen that much of what President Trump and others have put together has been modified. In fact, it would appear that their 21, I mean, you were just referring there, Jamal, to the 21 or 20-point plan. It was 21. I believe the reference to not attacking Qatar again was removed at the last minute. Hence, it's now 20. So it's something of a moving feast. And of course, there is, we understand currently with the Trump plan, there is some discussion amongst interested parties about further changes. Although, of course, we've been given this extraordinary deadline. You take it or leave it. Or once again, the Israelis are allowed to do their worst. But well, Sam, if you could just give us an idea, really, of what could you just very briefly just tell us what the nuts and bolts of this plan is? What makes it different, and what makes it actually something that is going to have to come into the mix for the overall process to be fruitful and successful?
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for having me doing this meeting. I think the plan brings or offers a pragmatic and rights-based plan for both a permanent ceasefire in both Palestine or the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel, and also it offers a pragmatic plan for as Jamal said, the transition period until we have a just, durable, and comprehensive settlement is reached to end the occupation, to end the Israeli occupation in Palestine, and resolve all the outstanding issues between Israelis and Palestinians. This plan terms actually recommends certain terms and mechanisms for Palestinian national reconciliation and political renewal to enable effective Palestinian governance, as well as a principled approach for facilitating humanitarian relief early recovery and reconstruction in Gaza. As you know, like most of the day after plans did not really include Palestinian voices much in their planning, but I think this plan brings a clear and obvious and strong Palestinian voice, as it is made basically or proposed basically by Palestinian intellectuals or technical group. Here, when we talk about the transition, the reference is aligned with the frameworks advanced by the UN Development Program, the State of Palestine, local governments in Gaza, and of course in the West Bank, and the Palestinian private sector, taking into consideration the communique of the Extraordinary Arab Summit. There are certain principles for this plan. I think like one is that the parties commit to diplomacy first and to the international law, and agree to be held to account for violation. As we know that Israel has never been made accountable for its crimes in Palestine, for its long-term occupation. The second principle is the stakeholders recognize that the state of Palestine is responsible for governance and the security over the occupied Palestinian territory. And this should be supported by a UN mandated, as Jamal said, like international peacekeeping force. The third principle of this plan is that all stakeholders reaffirm the Palestinian Liberation or PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, as the sole legitimate representative of all Palestinian people, including all Palestinian factions. I mean, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, Fatah, and all other factions. Also, here the cornerstone of this plan is that we offer a timelines or timetable for the implementation. We don't leave it, as a Trump's 20 or 21 point plan, vague or unclear with timetable. What we tried in this plan is to offer a timetable and action plan, for what to do in each stage or each phase of the implementation. I think this is like most pragmatic, most practical plan made by or proposed by Palestinian technical people, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, Wassim, I'd just come back to you on one of those points. I mean, as far as the United Nations is concerned, as far as most member states are concerned, the PLO is the sole representative voice of the Palestinians. And yet, I think, you acknowledge yourselves in this proposal that, actually, there are many voices in Palestine. And, there has to be some real thought given to one of the central demands, really, there's been coming from Palestinians for a very long time, that there must be elections right across the occupied Palestinian territories, and whether it's a Palestinian state on the 67 boundaries or whatever configuration the Palestinian state comes, there should be elections. I'm not altogether clear from the paper when you talk about timelines and what have you, if you have a timeline for those elections, and if, for instance, there is a movement that wins fair and square, but which is not necessarily a PLO organization, what is the standing then? I mean, this seems to be one of the sort of the Trump plan doesn't even address the idea of Palestinian statehood, as you know, is not interested in elections or anything, because he doesn't want to even go there, as far as we can see. But I mean, where do you stand? Where would you stand on all of that? So I'll come back.
Yeah, okay. I think like the election would be like one of the first steps to come to an agreement among the Palestinians to vote for a unity or government, to bring all the Palestinian factions under the PLO umbrella. Election is one of the cornerstone of the plan to bring all the Palestinian actions. If I remember quite well, it would be, I mean, we call for elections, I think, after 1 year, Jamal, if I remember quite well. Like we need like first steps to prepare for the elections among the Palestinians.
Yeah, if I may, and then I'm going to ask Zaha to jump in too, because this is obviously one of the crucial points that we thought a lot about. We have to be represented by the PLO. It is our representative. We understand that the PLO needs to be more inclusive, which means it needs to be inclusive of Hamas, Jihad, and so on, and therefore a mechanism to implement the Beijing Declaration. And we have a part that is addressing that particular issue. But we also needed to be obviously more inclusive in terms of hearing more voices, having more participation in decision making, and also more participation in oversight. And both of those things are built into from the very beginning. We build these elements into our plan, and Zaha can go into more detail on some quite interesting ideas that we have on citizen assemblies and so on. But what I would say is that on elections, first, we would distinguish between elections within the Palestinian state and elections for the PLO. Elections for the PLO are elections that should include all Palestinians, wherever they may be in the world, refugees, diaspora as well. And second, when it comes to elections within the Palestinian state for a government, then those particular elections cannot take place, at least not freely and fairly. There's no way that one can imagine them taking place in a period of war and occupation. Because we don't even have the right to say 50%, 20% of what we might want to say or think. Also, the purpose of elections, or the purpose of parties running for elections, would be to propose ideas for the future. And those ideas have to be, those electoral platforms, if you like, need time to come to fruition, and they need to exist within the context of at least armistice, if not a perpetual peace. So we cannot imagine elections taking place immediately, but there are many mechanisms that we have built in to ensure citizen involvement, oversight, and gradual renovation and renewal, reform. But the elections come later. And Zaha, I think I think this is one of the more interesting things. Sort of how we do this is fascinating, and Zaha, I think, should talk about it.
Yeah, no, I will ask you about that, Zaha, because I'm just saying, as the devil's advocate, people will say, okay, well, yes, elections, clearly there needs to be a very different kind of outlook and approach and inclusivity and all the rest of it. But some people will turn around and say, well, yes, but this idea that, and given we know also what the UN view is, the PLO sole representative, but, the people will also say, well, it's a bit like having an old style political party that was, people recognizable after the Second World War, which included agrarian parties and conservative parties and social democratic parties and all the rest of it, all the different factions, if you like. But it was still one party. You're still talking about a one-party state. And by the way, so much of this, you could say, frankly, given the intransigence of Netanyahu and the current Israeli government, the refusal to accept even the concept of Palestinian self-determination. As you say, well, we've got far more important things to be talking about than, how these elections could be held and how democratic an organization it can be. But I mean, you would also say the last time there were elections right across the occupied Palestinian territories, Fatah won in the West Bank and Hamas won in Gaza from memory. So what would be different?
So I want to, again, distinguish between PLO versus the state of Palestine's government and elections for the parliament for the state of Palestine. What we're talking about first and foremost that needs to be reformed is the PLO. The PLO represents all Palestinians everywhere. And if you ask any Palestinian, what do you think will help end the genocide? What needs to happen right now so that we can make decisions about our future? And they will say, we need to have a Palestinian national reconciliation. We need to reform the PLO. Or people say we need another structure. If the PLO isn't going to represent everyone anymore, we need another structure. But most people want to see the PLO reformed. Why? Because we can't make decisions about our future without a political address. And the PLO is really important to Palestinians because if you think about all these legal initiatives, these diplomatic initiatives to support Palestinian self-determination and rights, it's the PLO that's leading that. Even though it's been hollowed out and it's been undermined by various actors and by Palestinian leadership itself in favor of the Palestinian Authority, it still is our political address. So we need to deal with that. And the most important thing to do for that purpose of restoring its legitimacy and its ability to represent Palestinians everywhere is we need to have a way to open up the umbrella wider, to bring in those that aren't under the PLO. And that, as Jamal said, is the armed resistance groups, including Hamas, including Islamic Jihad, but also it needs to be opened up to include Palestinian civil society writ large, which has been completely, excluded from both the PLO and the Palestinian Authority because of the lack of elections. And, we're dealing, like so many other places around the world, in Palestine, we're dealing with polarization, these two big factions, Fatah and Hamas, that haven't been able to reconcile. And we believe that, if you think about it, a third of the population roughly supports Fatah, a third supports Hamas, and then you have the rest of Palestinians who, they don't support either, and they would like to have an opportunity to participate in civic life and in political life, and they don't have a way to express that. So by bringing in more Palestinians to engage and to be part of the various different components of the PLO, you will see renewal. You will see a different face and a different kind of representation within the PLO that can help alleviate the polarization. And we know Palestinians very much want this, because when we had the lead up to the canceled 2021 legislative elections for the Palestinian Authority, there was amazing participation. People, I think the voter registration was at 96% for Palestinians. And there was a slew of new lists, independent lists of Palestinians wanting to participate in the legislative election. So there is this hunger for representation and for credible institutions and leadership. But Palestinians haven't had an opportunity. But the first and foremost is getting the PLO in order. And, this is actually to Israel's benefit as well as Palestinians. Israel has recognized the PLO as a legitimate representative of Palestinians. If it ever hopes to have a peace agreement with Palestinians, it needs to know that that peace agreement will be honored by the PLO and all Palestinians represented by the PLO. And if you want to limit the incentives for spoilers, the way to do that is to bring them in under the umbrella. We know that from every other conflict that we've ever seen. Inclusive negotiations, inclusive talks are absolutely crucial to limiting the activities of spoilers. And so this is something that should be supported. But if you look at the Trump 20-point plan, it's absolutely prohibited. Hamas cannot be part of governance, which actually Hamas doesn't want to be governing. This is what they've promised.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because of course if you look back, certainly in the last century and the end of the British colonial empire, I mean, it was often said that the leaders of liberation struggles would be fighting the British until they sat down and had cups of tea with the Queen and then won the subsequent elections. And of course, as we know, there's been peace processes more recently in Northern Ireland, for instance, too, which has involved armed groups and also national armies putting their arms down and withdrawing on all sides. But your point about the Trump Netanyahu, well, the Trump plan, but also the Netanyahu government and its prescriptiveness, this is what makes it very difficult, I suspect, for your plan to be able to break through, because you're essentially sane and rational people who know and have deep roots in something that was known as the Enlightenment, and it's very, very difficult at the moment when it's you're presented with a 20-point plan that has to be accepted within 72 hours that seems to have avoided mention of essentially the purpose and the principle of almost every single main UN resolution you can think of when it comes to the occupied Palestinian territory. So this is got to be your difficulty in a way. So how do you? I mean, it's a difficult question. This, and I'll come to you, Zaha, and then to both of all of you. You could all
briefly. I'll just respond to that, because you're right. I mean, the momentum is behind this notion of complete surrender. If you look at that Trump 20-point plan, it's basically saying, we will end the genocide. We will allow food and essential supplies to go into Gaza as long as you accept everything that's here. I mean, I have never seen a negotiation required to end a genocide. Usually what we do is we force the party that's committing a genocide to stop it through sanctions and through other means. But that's the position Palestinians are in. And it's an impossible one when you have the world superpower arm in arm with the region's hegemon, working together to prevent, Palestinian self-determination. So it's a huge battle. But here's what Palestinians have to hope will come together. And this is a region that is completely frustrated by an Israel that it sees, out of control, seeking territorial aggrandizement at the expense of pretty much every country in the, in the region. You have a region that wants stabilization. They want to be able to trade. They want to be able to develop, and they need to do that only if they can get peace between Israel and the rest of its neighbors. So there's an incentive in the region to really push for a peace that is meaningful, that will actually bring stability. And Trump's 20-point plan isn't going to do that, and they know that.
Yes,
they have to be welcoming.
Yeah, but yet the Arab states have essentially welcomed this, and seem to be putting a lot, from what we understand, a lot of pressure on Hamas to accept this 20-point plan. Now, maybe you'll tell us that essentially this is part of a much bigger, longer-term game plan, and the Arab states are looking beyond this immediate period, the next 2 to 3 years, when for a whole lot of what you're proposing in your recommendations could be adopted. That could be what they're thinking, but you could also say that for all of that, the pressure that has come from the Arab world has been pretty minimal in many respects. So what hope do you have of getting major backers such as the Saudis and the other Gulf states behind the Palestinian Armistice Plan?
Like I said, I don't see in the Trump 20-point plan any hope of creating a stable region. In fact, if there was any notion that this was a serious plan, you wouldn't have found Netanyahu immediately after the White House announcement going on the air and telling people that he's never leaving Gaza and he's never going to see a Palestinian state come to fruition. He's being very clear, and the Arab governments, Saudi Arabia in particular, are listening, and they understand. They have seen, I think we're at 9 countries now that Israel has attacked in the region, and they understand the stakes at this point. It's true that we haven't yet seen the kind of leadership among the Arab governments on this question that needs to take place. But I think the trend is now more towards accountability for Israel and putting pressure on Israel. The question is, how are they going to do it, and how are they going to convince Trump to get on board? That is something that we have to wait and see. But I don't think that it's not just a question of Palestine, Israel anymore. This is a regional problem and an international security problem. And that's why you saw at the UN General Assembly, the general debate, you saw almost every country talk about Israel-Palestine, talk about the need to end the genocide, talk about the importance of getting to a permanent ceasefire and Palestinian self-determination. And that's why you saw so many Western European countries and countries that have been holding recognition of Palestine back finally do so, finally recognize the state of Palestine, because they need to signal and create momentum behind the idea that this cannot continue, that this cannot go on. So there is this momentum building. How long it's going to take the United States to get on board is not clear yet, but it's a start.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Wassam, I mean, it's all those are really very powerful points. I mean, you do have, in many respects, an isolated United States that has been supportive of Israel all the way through, that has used its veto repeatedly, that has produced a plan, a take it or leave it plan that doesn't really provide any serious roadmap, if we can use that word, to lasting peace and a Palestinian state. And yet, as Zaha was saying, international opinion is mobilized in a way that we haven't seen, I don't think, since the end of apartheid South Africa, behind the Palestinians and amongst member states. It's absolutely overwhelming. And yet, Wassam, I mean, what do you say when, despite all of that, we're still reliant, it would seem, on the whims of President Trump? It's what he decides from day to day as to what is permissible and what is not. And so you can have all these Western states recognizing Palestine at long last, but it hasn't moved Trump yet, has it?
Not yet. I think they have not moved Trump so far. I think the voice of an international community is very important. It's very much needed, but it's still it stays on the level of even like less criticizing, like raising the voice, but less criticizing and less action. What we need, I think, is like more actions, more practical steps, more pressure from the international community, starting from the Arab countries, the Gulf countries, and then, of course, the European countries, and of course the rest of the world. We need more pressure, more practical steps, rather than just raising the issue. Of course, like it's not only Trump's administration that is behind Israel. It's like all the consecutive administrations of the US have been like supporting Israel politically, militarily, and of course in the UN. What we have been observing is like the change of the global order made by Trump, and this has been affecting the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or at least the affairs. We should not lose the hope. I don't, see any like way to lose the hope that something might happen. I think we need to have like more inclusive approach, where starting from the Palestinian side, including all the factions under the umbrella of the PLO, and then getting the support of the, as I said, like the Arab League or the Arab countries, and then of course the support of the European countries. I think with all these, let's say, unity, of actions might, at least, I don't say like force, but at least encourage or move Trump's administration to take action, to find a solution.
Jamal, I mean, I keep on using this word blueprint. I mean, you may say that's a bit it doesn't really sum this up properly enough, because I mean there is a set of recommendations, a plan here of deep seriousness that really is not being addressed by the United States and its supporters in such a way. But you are still facing this sort of this hedgehog of resistance, if you like. And I wonder also, because you're rational people dealing with sometimes quite irrational people on all sides. I mean, there's no doubt about that. There are some people that are very happy to go behind the barricades, and they're not interested in any compromise at all. But there is another issue that you face in a way, in that it was actually summed up, to my mind, by Secretary of State Rubio the other day, when he talked about the United States Constitution as being a Judeo-Christian construct. And I was very taken by that, because actually, as we all know, it was a product very much of the Enlightenment. And you can see, I had to say this, the Christian evangelicals with very strong Zionist sympathies have got very senior positions in the United States administration, also in the military. Mike Huckabee, the ambassador, talks about Judea and Samaria. I mean, these people actually, in some respects, see Israel as being another US state. So how do you break through all of that? Do you not need to be making people more aware of what you're up against, in a way?
Yeah, thank you. I think that in general, even in the United States, people are now significantly more aware of what's going on. I also have no particular problem with anybody's personal beliefs, to the extent that they don't end up obviously destroying the rights and freedoms of others. In this case, I would say that the reason, if I'm coming back to the original question, why do we think this will work, or what can we do? I think that the Trump plan is a partial plan. It's probably not going to go very far, but like we said at the beginning, anything that stops the killing right now and gets food, shelter, medicines to the people who are starving is crucial. But it's not going to work in any bigger sense. And as the violence continues on the West Bank, for instance, and in Jerusalem, whether or not Israel decides to annex, the Palestinian Authority is on the verge of collapse. Resistance in the West Bank is rising as well. So they may end up putting a damper on Gaza for a month or two, but find themselves suddenly with a West Bank that has fallen apart. And meanwhile, the rest of the region is being obviously slowly, but very surely, pushed towards increasing unrest also in the countries around us. So it's not just at the level of the governments, but also at the levels of the peoples. The question of Palestine and Palestinian rights and freedom and the genocide per se has electrified people from the Middle East all the way through Europe and even in the United States. So I don't necessarily agree that we have to sort of wait for President Trump to change his mind. I think that he will also see which way the wind is blowing and what he needs to do. But I also want to say, and this is very important, and I think that it is part of what we were trying to do, and it is part of what we state in our plan. We have to do something. We, the Palestinians, our leadership has to take an action. Our leadership has to behave. We are now supposedly a state. We need to behave as a state would behave. We, yes, as the Palestinians, and I say we, I am not part of the leadership, no, and unfortunately none of us is, or maybe fortunately, but leadership has to do things that it is incumbent upon them to do. They have to take those steps. And therefore, we have to take some blame as Palestinians for the fact that we're not doing them. I think that we can respond.
Because you are the Palestinian Technical Working Group. I mean, are you almost unconsciously actually saying to people, well, look, we're here. We've produced this. We have got a very good idea about what happens and how we can help bring people together. And perhaps it is, you and many others, if this is the new leadership of tomorrow. But we're talking. All of you are talking. The new leaders of tomorrow, in a way.
Mark, I think, if I may, that what's happened now has brought out hundreds, if not thousands, of voices, Palestinian voices around the world, who are looking at what is happening, who are putting their minds and hearts into trying to make things better. And the potential that we have as a people to build something better, and to build something better not just for us, but also for the Israelis with us, next to us, perhaps amongst us, I don't know. That potential is vast. And so I don't think it is the three of us or the six of us or the wider group that we interact with. I think it is many, many more. And that's where things like elections and reform have to take place in order to allow these voices to come in. But what I do think is that for those people who are sitting there now, they do need to take certain actions. They do. And that is one thing that, I mean, yes, of course, the Europeans need to take more actions and sanction. I would love the United States government to be more consistent in its policy and to also, care about things like international law. It would be lovely, but we also have to do something.
And Wessam, I think it's worth, reminding people that so many Palestinian leaders have either been imprisoned by the Israelis. There's been a deliberate policy over a very long period of time to prevent a new leadership emerging. And of course, people will also say that within the Palestinian Authority itself, there's been a reluctance to hold elections and to allow new blood and new leadership to emerge. So are you confident that there are, as Jamal was saying, there's new leadership, fresh blood that can emerge, that is going to which will have learned so many bitter and hard lessons, but will have also learned that you can get there, as so many others have, from Algeria to South Africa to Zimbabwe?
The question, why don't we have like a merged leadership? I think we should be confident enough that a new emerged leadership might occur, and then new faces of leaders. Palestinian leaders, not necessarily from only inside Palestine, but also from outside Palestine, coming in and together to establish, let's say, or emerge new leaders who can take actions and take the role of negotiations or convincing, starting from the US and then the rest of the world. Actually, I don't see any issue or any problem to see new leaders of in Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I think this is really much needed.
Yes. Yeah. Zaha, because we're running out of time, sadly, but if I could sort of finally come to you, if you're to sort of reaching out, right across historic Palestine, Israel-Palestine, what would you say to those Israelis who also want peace, who also have the longer-term view in mind? There may not be a majority in Israel currently, but what would you say? How would you sort of build relations with Israelis, like-minded Israelis, who are prepared to sit down and discuss and be serious and try to reach some kind of a future that involves statehood for all?
Yeah, look, I think it's become abundantly clear that Palestinian safety and security is tied to Israeli safety and security, and vice versa. If October 7th didn't teach us anything, it should have taught us that. Gaza was kept under blockade and siege for all these, years. Why? Because Israel wanted its security. That was the justification for encapsulating Gaza the way it did. And that didn't bring any security for Israel, because when you deny people their freedoms and you deny them the rights to self-determination and just basic human rights, you can never be secure. And so, I think that there are a growing number of Israelis that are understanding this now, and they understand how corrupting it is to have a government take control over millions of people's lives and deny them, the franchise and deny them, the basics of humanity. They understand how that impacts themselves, those who do have rights and that do have freedoms, how it starts to corrupt their own institutions. And so there is this growing awareness among Israelis about this issue. And there's a growing awareness among American Jews as well, who have supported Israel and now see what's taking place in Israel-Palestine, and understanding that they have a role to play too in making that situation end, so that Palestinians and Israelis can both be free and both live in security and dignity. So, it's not happening fast enough, this realization, and it's not, it's not satisfactory to those of us who want to see an end to what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in the West Bank as well now. But it is starting, and we have to do whatever we can to help that along. And this contribution that we made with this Palestinian Armistice Plan is a branch to not just to Palestinians, but also to Israelis, and to say, we can do this. We can do this ourselves, and we can make the rest of the world come along with us.
Well, thank you, Zaha, and thank you to all of you. And I'm sure we're going to come back to all of this in the months to follow. The Palestinian Armistice Plan is out there. You should be able to see it. We will provide it for you here at Palestine Deep Dive. Please share it, discuss it, promote it in any which way you can in order to help. Because we have a very serious plan here for action, and it requires serious people to take it up. So thank you very much indeed, all three of you, for joining us today. And thank you for joining us at Palestine Deep Dive. And we hope to see you again soon.